Hey everyone, it's Jace from the Jacelicious official YouTube channel. I'm sure a few of you have seen my videos floating around on the Hytale side of YouTube, and I'll say after a long break as a result of the game's delay, I am excited to be back and making content for you guys. Not only that, but I'm excited especially to be a part of Hytale Together, which is likely to be the latest and greatest Hytale YouTube channel created to date. So I'm really both honored and humbled to be a part of this channel. With that said though, I'm sure you guys aren't here to listen to me babble. Instead, you probably want to hear me talk about Hytale, so I'll skip the crap and just kind of jump right into it and talk about Hytale. And that we shall do. Today's topic is an old video topic of mine, actually, that I kind of wanted to revisit because I don't really feel it got enough attention, and I think that it's kind of important to bring up, especially in terms of speculation for the game. Today's topic specifically is about the influence of the Warhammer Fantasy series and how it might shape Hytale's development a little bit, and how we might be able to see some of the design elements and motifs from the Warhammer Fantasy series in Hytale, and also how we can see some of those already. In doing so, I'm kind of hoping to open up a new window or perspective for speculation within the Hytale community and kind of give us new ideas on what will or won't be in the game, and just kind of help us to have a little bit more fun with this and maybe throw out some new and interesting ideas on what we might potentially see in the game. Now, don't be scared if you don't know what the Warhammer Fantasy series is, because that's pretty normal for the most part. Just so you won't feel left out, I'll fill you in really quick. The Warhammer Fantasy series is the precursor to the Warhammer 40k tabletop game that was created by Games Workshop. The game revolves around the strategic movement of an army of plastic models around the playing space in a sort of turn-based army battle. It boasts a large unit variety with detailed and interesting models, as well as a plethora of races to choose on. Recently, however, the Warhammer Fantasy series has seen a huge surge in popularity as a company called Creative Assembly, the creators of the Total War series, released a trilogy of real-time strategy video game adaptations of the series called the Total War Warhammer series. You may have seen it on Steam. I'm personally a huge fan of them. I find them wildly fun, and it's part of the reason I wanted to talk about them today. Now, most recently, of course, with the release of Total War Warhammer 3, the series' popularity is at an all-time high. I can hear you saying, though, why is this relevant to Hytale? Well, of course, we know that a few members of the Hytale development team, specifically Moo, play the Warhammer tabletop. On screen right now are a few tweets I managed to dig up from some of the members of the team, showing off some of the figures they've made and such. And also, I do want to point out that the paint jobs on some of these figures are really nice and really impressive. Now, of course, inspiration can come from anywhere, though you might find it frequently comes from things that you enjoy. With that said, who's to say that we won't see some concepts or ideas explored in the Warhammer Fantasy series in Hytale? Actually, what if I told you that we already have? Let's start with the easy stuff, shall we? I'm sure everyone knows about the Trorks from Hytale's Emerald Grove region. They're half troll, half orc, and they have a bad attitude and a penchant for violence towards the Kweebec inhabitants of the lands surrounding them. This is, of course, somewhat similar to the Greenskins in Warhammer Fantasy, which are a collection of orcs, goblins, and anything else under the sun that happens to be green, which all seem to share a biological craving for violence and combat. Of course, you might argue that orcs and trolls are a pretty common fantasy trope, and that their inclusion in Hytale really isn't anything special. And you would be right about that, though the rabbit trail goes a lot further than that. Let's look at Scarix. Scarix are, of course, your standard hive mind, insectoid, evil race that inhabit the desert regions of Orbis. Though I couldn't help but notice a vague resemblance with the Warhammer, not the Warhammer Fantasy series, sorry, the Warhammer 40k series specifically, that I felt was worth mentioning. Now, specifically I'm referring to Tyranids. Tyranids are also a hive mind insectoid evil race that inhabit the space regions of Warhammer 40k. Now, the main similarities I wanted to look at was just kind of their overall designs. Both the Scarix and the Tyranids seem to share a sort of darker colored exoskeleton that lines their back with a sort of lighter colored scale plating on their underbellies, as well as a ridiculous amount of limbs and a lot of blade appendages of some kind, sort of claws and sharp teeth and that kind of thing. But that's still too easy, right? How many series have we seen in the gaming industry so far that have some sort of evil insectoid hive mind race that's trying to destroy everything? We even see that in StarCraft 1 and 2 with the Zerg. And of course, again, you would be right about that. It is a pretty common fantasy trope. And that's what leads me to the Outlanders. The Outlanders, I think, are the most obvious similarity between Hytale and the Warhammer Fantasy series. Now, Outlanders are, as we know, an evil-worshipping human faction that lives in the icy tundras to the north. They live in a sort of tribal lifestyle, partake in dark magic, and, most significantly, worship Varin, the evil deity of Hytale. Keep that stored. Their parallel from Warhammer Fantasy is the Norska. Now, the Norska are also an evil-worshipping human faction that lives in the icy tundras to the north. They also have a tribal lifestyle and partake in dark magic. However, they also worship four beings known as the Chaos Gods, which are on screen now for context, which function as the Warhammer Fantasy and also Warhammer 40k's versions of an evil deity. Essentially, the Chaos Gods are the Warhammer's version of Varin, which means both the Outlanders and Norska are effectively conceptually the same. Now, I can talk all day about how I can find a bunch of subtle nods to the Warhammer Fantasy series within Hytale already, and I can possibly go into that in a later video. Though what I want to focus on today is how this might help us predict Hytale's story. Of course, if we can see a bunch of design elements and inspiration from other media in the game, it seems only reasonable that some of these inspirations may carry into the story. Of course, that's not to affirm that my speculations will all come true, of course, but I think that the added insight may help us to make more educated guesses at what the final product we receive in the future will be, especially in terms of story. Now, one of the main mysteries surrounding Hytale right now is what's up with the humans. Of course, we've seen our fair share of humans in the promotional art for the game, but all of them, presumably, were player characters rather than in-game NPCs. While that's already suspicious in its own right, we have the added element of the undead. In short, all of the skeletons that we've seen in the promotional screenshots, gameplay, and other forms of media surrounding the game have explicitly been human skeletons. Now, we know that in the Hytale universe, Varin, the Dark God, has managed to spread his influence throughout Orbis after he wounded Gaia. This is, of course, all information confirmed by developers, mostly through concept art and other blog posts. Now, in parallel, the plot of Total War Warhammer 3's storyline, sees the influence of the Chaos God, the previous mentioned Dark Gods and parallels to Varin in the Warhammer series. You see their influence being spread throughout the world after one of the good guy gods, named Ursun, was mortally wounded. Off the bat, we already see similarities here. Now, much of the Warhammer story revolves around the so-called forces of order, the good guys, mostly humans, beating back the bad guy forces of chaos. Of course, we can already see this happening in Hytale, however, I speculate that Hytale's story takes place in a world where the forces of chaos have won. We see, for instance, in the surface region of Zone 4, that there are ruins of what appear to be human settlements, all laying around the magma-filled wastes. We can tell, of course, that these are human settlements as they are inhabited by animated human skeletons. Now, I speculate that Hytale takes place after a sort of end times apocalyptic event, much like what happens in Warhammer's own end times event, where the forces of chaos invade from the immaterial world into the material world and effectively cause the apocalypse. I think that as players, we will be exploring a world in which society has essentially collapsed as a result of the invasion, splintering into small NPC communities around the map for us to interact with, which means we're probably not going to see many large cities, it'll mostly just be limited to small villages. Additionally, I think that we'll see a plethora of Varin-based enemies and Varin-worshipping factions popping up all over the place as the game progresses. And lastly, I think that we, the player, will be taking the fight to Varin's home turf and killing him in his own territory. Much like how in Total War Warhammer 3, the player invades the realm of chaos to engage their forces on their own turf, rather than wait for the fight to come to their doorstep. While of course all of these story elements are present within the Warhammer Fantasy series, I have to reiterate again that I don't mean to affirm that any of these story elements were directly copied or inspired by the Warhammer Fantasy series. I think too that the Hytale devs kind of know what they're doing and don't really need to plagiarize another company's IP. Instead, the point that I'm trying to get at here is that if we as a community are going to speculate on what Hytale's story is going to be, I think the best place to start is with the interests of the developers themselves. As if we know where they pull their inspirations from, we may be able to more accurately predict what the final product will entail, specifically in terms of story. So, in essence, I'm not saying that by looking at the Warhammer series, we can 100% accurately guess exactly what's going to be in the story, but what I am saying is that by looking at what the developers enjoy and what their interests are, we can probably get a much better idea on what design elements and motifs we'll possibly see in the game on release. Now, with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below. Also, in the description below is a link to my own channel, as well as a few videos from other Warhammer-related channels that I use to get a lot of the information that I used in this video. And if you're interested in more information, both about the Warhammer series and how it relates to Hytale, be sure to say something about that in the comments down below, and I can possibly in the future look towards making a video that kind of lays out a few more of those similarities so that you guys can kind of get a better idea of what I'm talking about and also see some of these similarities yourself. With that said, again, be sure to like and subscribe, and be sure to subscribe not only to my channel, but to all the other channels in Hytale Together, and I will see you guys around.